Sebastian Crow stepped out of his black Lamborghini Huracan like a man who had never once been told no. He looked at the mechanic standing near the bay door, the one wiping his hands on a strip of old shop rag, and said it plainly, the way men like him said most things. "I don't let people like you touch my car." Dominic Hale said nothing. He nodded once, stepped back, and let Sebastian climb in on his own terms, proud, certain, sure, he had just won something. Then the click came, one small sound. Every light inside the car went dark. The door would not open, the windows would not move. Sebastian Crow, the man who had just refused help, was locked inside his own $200,000 machine. The only person who could get him out was the one he had just insulted. And Dominic had not yet decided whether he was in a hurry. The morning had started the way most mornings at Hale & Sons Auto started, with cold coffee, fluorescent light, and the comfortable company of work that needed doing. The garage sat on a quiet industrial block on the northwest side of Chicago, the kind of block where the buildings were old and the people were not impressed by much. The sign above the roll-up door was hand-lettered, the paint slightly faded at the edges. Inside, 2 bays ran parallel under a ceiling, strung with clip lights and coiled air hoses, and the whole place smelled of gear, oil, and sawdust, and something faintly sweet that no one had ever been able to identify. Dominic Hale lay on his back beneath a charcoal Porsche Cayenne, his left hand braced against the undercarriage and his right working a socket wrench through a sequence of quarter turns that had their own rhythm, almost musical. He was 34 years old, lean in the way that physical work made a man lean, with dark circles under his eyes that had been there for 3 years and showed no sign of leaving. He wore a gray thermal shirt with a small burn mark on the left cuff and oil-stained canvas trousers. He was not a man who spent time in front of mirrors. On the wooden stool near the far wall, his daughter Luna sat with her school bag at her feet and her nose in a picture book she had already read 4 times. She was 7, with her mother's cheekbones and her father's quietness, and she read aloud in a near whisper the way she did most things, not performing for anyone, just processing the world at her own pace. In her lap sat a stuffed rabbit, white once and now more ivory, its left ear reattached with a loop of red thread that Dominic had sewn tight that very morning, using a needle from his tool chest. The rabbit went everywhere Luna went. No one had ever suggested otherwise. Marcus Webb, the garage's only other full-time employee, came through the side door with his jacket still on and a folded piece of paper in his hand. He was 52, built like a man who had once been much larger and then thought better of it, and he wore the expression of someone carrying news that had not yet decided whether it was good or bad. "Big one this morning," he said, dropping the paper on the corner of the workbench. "Client called last night." VIP is the word he used 3 times. Dominic said nothing for a moment. His wrench continued its quarter turns. "Lamborghini," Marcus added. "What model?" "Huracan Stowe." He said it like I was supposed to clap. Dominic slid partway out from under the Cayenne and reached for his coffee. It had been sitting on the bench for 40 minutes. He drank it anyway. Luna looked up from her book. "Bud," she said her name for the rabbit. "Bud says fancy cars always have problems." "Bud is not wrong," Marcus said, pouring himself a cup from the same cold pot. Dominic looked at his daughter, and something softened around his eyes that stayed hard everywhere else. He crossed to her stool, picked up the rabbit, and examined the repaired ear. The thread was holding. He pressed the ear flat and handed the rabbit back. "I'm going to drop you at Mrs. Grace's before I open the bay," he said. Luna hugged the rabbit. "What if the fancy car person is mean?" Dominic pulled his thermal cuff down over his wrist. "Then they're mean. That doesn't change what I do." Luna considered this with the gravity that 7-year-olds reserved for important things. Then she nodded and slid off the stool and collected her bag, and Dominic watched her go with an expression that no client would ever see. On the workbench, next to the coffee maker and the parts catalog, there was a small framed photograph, a woman with dark hair and an easy smile, standing in front of a lake somewhere. Dominic did not look at it as he passed. He had gotten very good at that. He was back inside 12 minutes. Marcus was already rolling the bay door up, letting in the gray Chicago morning, and somewhere outside a car with an exhaust note like a low drum roll was turning off the street. The Lamborghini Huracan STO came in slow, the way a ship enters a harbor, aware of itself, aware of the space it displaced. It was painted in a black so deep and so perfectly finished that it seemed to absorb the overhead light rather than reflect it. It sat low to the ground on wide carbon ceramic wheels, and even at idle, at barely walking pace through a garage door, it sounded like something that had opinions. Sebastian Crow stepped out. He was somewhere in his mid-40s, with the kind of physical fitness that came from personal trainers and routine rather than from effort he found meaningful. His suit was charcoal gray and had been cut for him by someone who charged accordingly. His watch caught the shop light once and threw a small gold arc across the wall. He looked around the garage in the way that certain men look around spaces, not searching for anything, simply measuring. Marcus moved to greet him, hand extended, voice warm. "Mr. Crow." "Marcus Webb. Thanks for coming in." Sebastian shook the hand briefly and looked past him. "Is the lead technician available?" "That's Dominic. He'll be right with you." Sebastian turned a slow quarter circle, taking in the bays, the lift, the tool chests, the ceiling. His expression did not change, but something in the set of his shoulders communicated a verdict he had not bothered to voice. Dominic came around from behind the Cayenne, wiping his hands. He stopped a few feet away and looked at the Lamborghini before he looked at Sebastian. He stood there a moment, the way a doctor stands before reading a chart, not performing assessment, just doing it. "What's the issue?" he asked. Sebastian turned. He looked at Dominic, the thermal shirt, the oil on the knuckles, the worn boots, and the looking took about 2 seconds longer than necessary. "Electronic stability failure warning," Sebastian said. "Shows on the HMI display intermittently. The car runs fine. Lamborghini Chicago has a 3-week backlog. Someone told me about this place." "When did the warning start?" "About 10 days ago. It appears at startup. Sometimes clears, sometimes stays through the drive." Dominic nodded slowly. He moved to the driver's side of the car, not touching it, just looking at the angle of the dashboard through the window. Something registered in his expression, a small recognition that came and went before anyone caught it. "When did you have any aftermarket work done on the car?" he asked. Sebastian's posture shifted slightly. "I don't see how that's relevant." "It might be. The warning pattern you're describing doesn't usually appear on a factory-spec HMI without a secondary trigger. Something's interfering with the stability module's environmental read." Sebastian looked at him the way people look at a stranger who has just used a word they weren't expecting. "I didn't come here to be interviewed," he said. "I came here to have a warning light addressed." "I understand that. Do you have diagnostic software for the Huracan's Generation 4 platform?" Dominic didn't answer immediately. He was still looking at the car. "We have what we need." "That's not what I asked." A beat of silence. In the quiet, the fluorescent lights hummed. "I'd like to run a preliminary read before we discuss scope," Dominic said. Sebastian took a half step back from the car and straightened his jacket. "I'm going to wait on that. I've got my own technician coming. He'll be here in a couple of hours. That's your choice." "Yes, it is." Marcus appeared with a cup of coffee and the offer of the waiting area, a battered sofa, a low table with automotive trade magazines, a window looking out onto the side lot. Sebastian declined the coffee, accepted the sofa with visible reluctance, and pulled out his phone. Dominic went back to the Cayenne. It was 20 minutes later when Luna came back through the side door. Mrs. Grace had a church auxiliary meeting she had forgotten about, which meant the plan had changed, which meant Luna arrived at the garage with her bag over one shoulder and Bud tucked under her arm, already scanning for her stool. She found it, climbed up, and opened her book again. She did not look at Sebastian. Sebastian looked at her. "You bring your kid to work?" he said. "Not to Marcus, not to anyone in particular." Dominic's voice came from under the Cayenne. "She's not in anyone's way." Sebastian said nothing more. He looked at Luna, the way people look at something mildly inconvenient. Not unkind, not kind, just removed. Luna looked up from her book, glanced at him once, and looked back down. She pulled Bud a little closer. "Bud," she whispered, barely audible. "That man looks like he doesn't like anything." Sebastian's technician arrived at 9:53 in a leased sedan. His name was Kyle Marsh, early 30s. Competent in the way of people who had passed the right certifications and attended the right webinars, carrying a professional-grade diagnostic laptop in a padded case, and the kind of confidence that fills rooms right up until something goes wrong. Kyle greeted Sebastian with the brisk efficiency of someone billing by the hour, set his laptop on the low table, and went to the car. He connected his OBD interface to the primary diagnostic port under the dash, opened his software, and began pulling error logs. Sebastian stood with his arms loosely crossed, watching. The expression on his face was the closest thing to satisfaction it had managed all morning. He glanced toward Dominic, who had not moved from his position under the Cayenne and was not watching any of this. This, Sebastian said to no one, to the garage, to whatever audience the universe was providing, is what trained looks like. The wrench turned. Quarter turn. Quarter turn. Dominic said nothing. Kyle was scrolling through his error log, frowning now, tapping back through the data. The frown deepened. He opened a second window, cross-referenced something, tapped again. Dominic slid 6 inches further out from under the Cayenne and tilted his head just enough to see the laptop screen from across the bay. He was there for 2 seconds. Then he slid back under. He had seen enough. Kyle set his hands on his knees and said, "Okay. What I'm going to do is run a firmware reset on the stability control module. The error codes are pointing to a corrupted initialization sequence. Clean reset should clear it." Sebastian nodded. "How long?" 15, 20 minutes. Kyle connected his secondary interface, opened the reset utility, configured the target module. His fingers moved with the practiced speed of someone who had done this particular procedure dozens of times on a dozen different platforms. He had not done it on this one. Dominic appeared at the edge of the bay. He had set down his wrench. He was looking at Kyle's screen. "I wouldn't run that sequence on this car," he said. Kyle looked up. "Sorry?" "The reset utility you're using. It's version 7.4. The STO's LDCS module on this generation requires 7.6 or later. 7.4 will execute the reset and report success, but it won't correctly handle the third-party hardware flag." Kyle stared at him. "What third-party hardware flag?" "There's aftermarket equipment installed on this car. The module knows it's there. If you reset without accounting for that, the immobilizer protocol will read it as a tampering event." Sebastian's voice cut in. Flat. "Are you done?" Dominic looked at him. "Kyle knows what he's doing," Sebastian said. "You've already been very helpful just standing there." A moment. The fluorescent lights. The low hum. Dominic stepped back. Kyle looked at his screen, then at Dominic, then back at his screen. He hesitated for exactly 3 seconds. Then he pressed enter. The progress bar on the laptop moved steadily to the right. 40%, 60%, 80. The car sat still and dark and quiet, and for a moment it seemed like nothing was going to happen at all. Then the Lamborghini spoke. 3 short electronic tones. Not the friendly chime of a system completing a task, but something clipped and final. The sound of a door being closed from the inside. Every light in the cabin extinguished. The HMI display went black, then blazed back to life in deep red, filled with a column of error codes that scrolled too fast to read. The ambient lighting strips along the door panels pulsed twice and died. Kyle's laptop showed, "Reset complete system status. Secured." Sebastian uncrossed his arms. "What does secured mean?" Kyle was already typing. It means the system completed. It's probably just rebooting." Sebastian moved to the driver's door and pulled the handle. The door did not open. He pulled again. Nothing. He found the interior electronic release and pressed it. Nothing. He pressed the window switch. Nothing. He put both hands on the door frame and pushed. The way you push on something you don't quite believe is really resisting you. The door did not open. The Lamborghini Huracan STO had activated its thief immobilizer protocol, a cascade lock function embedded in the LDCS module that interpreted the firmware mismatch, combined with the signal from an unregistered aftermarket camera module mounted behind the rear seat as evidence of unauthorized access. Every electronic lock in the car had sealed. Every window motor had frozen. Every interior release had gone passive. The cabin was sealed as cleanly as a vault. It was 89 degrees Fahrenheit outside on the northwest side of Chicago. Inside a sealed vehicle with no ventilation and no shade, The temperature would begin climbing immediately. Kyle. Sebastian's voice had changed. Not loud. Quieter, actually, which was worse. Open the door. Kyle was typing fast. Then faster. I'm trying the module isn't accepting override commands. Open the door. Mr. Crow, I need a minute. Sebastian put his hand flat on the window and pushed. The glass was thick, the acoustic insulation excellent. His voice came through muted and strange. He turned and looked at Marcus, who had gone very still near the tool chest, with the expression of a man watching a fire spread toward something he cared about. Call 911, Sebastian said through the glass, muffled, certain. Dominic spoke from 6 feet away, and his voice was calm enough that everyone stopped. Don't call anyone. Marcus turned. Dominic. Calling the fire department means they cut the door. That's a carbon fiber door panel. It doesn't get replaced easily or cheaply. Then what do we... I know what happened. I know how to fix it. He paused. It'll take some time. Sebastian had turned away from the window and was looking at Dominic directly, through the glass. The arrogance had not gone. Men like Sebastian did not shed it like a coat, but something underneath it had shifted. The way ground shifts before you realize it was not as solid as you thought. Dominic walked to the window and knocked on it 3 times. Not hard. A signal more than a demand. Then he spoke loudly and clearly. I hear you in there. Stay calm. Don't use the emergency glass breaker. You'll breathe broken glass in a sealed cabin. I'm going to get you out. Just stay still. Sebastian stared at him. Then, slowly, he nodded. Luna had come down from her stool. She was standing just behind Dominic's left elbow, Bud pressed against her chest. Can you open it, Dad? She said very quietly. Dominic looked down at her. Yes. He went to his tool chest. Marcus tried the Lamborghini assistance line first. The automated system transferred him to technical support, where a representative confirmed that the LDCS thief immobilizer protocol was a known function, but that remote override was not available, and that a certified technician would need to be dispatched. The earliest available appointment was that afternoon, between 2 and 5. It was 10:17 in the morning. Kyle had connected a second device, a bypass unit he used for key cloning, and was attempting to approach the lock module through the auxiliary OBD port on the exterior of the vehicle. The module recognized the device, categorized it as another unregistered external interface, and added a second layer of security flag. The doors locked harder, if that was possible. Kyle sat back and looked at the car the way a man looks, at a problem that has just become 2 problems. Inside the car, Sebastian had removed his jacket. He had folded it with surprising neatness and placed it on the passenger seat. He was sitting very straight, which was the posture of a man who had decided that composure was the only thing still available to him. A bead of sweat moved from his hairline down past his ear. He watched it go, in the mirrored surface of the window. Luna walked to the small refrigerator near the back of the garage and came back with a can of cold water, which she held out to her father. Dominic took it, drank half, and handed it back without looking away from the car. What do you see? Luna asked. I see someone who didn't listen, Dominic said. He said it without any particular weight, the way he might have said the weather had changed. He looked at Sebastian through the glass. Sebastian was watching him, and I see someone who's probably figuring out that not listening is expensive. Luna turned and looked at Sebastian, too. He looked scared. A little. Do you feel sorry for him? Dominic was quiet for a moment. He turned the water can in his hands. Yeah, he said. I do. Luna looked at her father carefully, the way she sometimes did when he said something that she needed to store and think about later. Then she went back to her stool and picked up Bud and sat with her book open but unread. In the sealed car, Sebastian had begun to understand something that no amount of money made easier to understand. That a sealed space gets smaller the longer you sit in it, and that the heat is not the worst part. The worst part is that you cannot make anything happen. Every instinct he had toward action, toward authority, toward the use of leverage, had nowhere to go. He had pressed every button available to him. None of them had worked. He was sitting in $200,000 of engineering excellence, and he could not get out. He looked at Kyle, who shook his head. He looked at Marcus, who spread his hands. Then he looked at Dominic Hale, who was standing at the edge of the bay, not rushing, not performing calm, simply waiting with the particular stillness of a man who already knows what the next step is and sees no reason to announce it. Sebastian pressed his palm against the glass. He looked at Dominic. He nodded. Dominic nodded back. He picked up his tool case and moved. He did not begin with the doors. He went around to the rear of the car, crouched low, and ran 2 fingers along the underside of the rear bumper fascia until he found the pressure clip he was looking for. He pressed it in no tool, just thumb pressure at the right angle, and the lower panel released with a soft pop. He set it aside carefully and looked at what was behind it. Kyle had drifted close, watching. "What are you doing?" Dominic didn't answer. He opened his tool case and took out a device that did not come from any shelf at any automotive supply store. It was compact, matte black, with a short cable terminating in a custom-machined connector and a small screen showing a command line interface. Kyle looked at it the way you look, at something that belongs to a world you can see but have never entered. The device had taken Dominic 11 months to build, working evenings after Luna was asleep, pulling from his memory of systems he had designed at a different desk in a different life. He plugged the custom connector into a secondary data port behind the rear fascia, not the standard OBD port, not the auxiliary port, a third port that the official Lamborghini service documentation mentioned in a footnote, with no further elaboration. Dominic knew it well. He had helped specify it. On his small screen, data began to flow. He read through it without moving, the way a surgeon reads a scan, not hurrying, not performing patience, just seeing. The module logged the firmware mismatch at 10, 22, and 14 seconds, he said, mostly to himself. It flagged the camera unit at the same timestamp. Both triggers together pushed it into full immobilizer mode. He typed a short command. The screen returned to status. Good. The rollback pathway is still open. Rollback? Kyle said. The module keeps a shadow image of the last stable firmware state. I can push a restoration command to that image, but only if I can interrupt power to the lock relay at exactly the right moment. If the power cut and the command don't sync within about 4 seconds of each other, the module interprets it as another attack and locks permanently. Kyle stared at him. How do you know all that? Dominic looked at him briefly, then back at his screen. Because I know this system. He stood and moved to the front of the car. The hood release on the STO was operated electronically from inside the cabin, which was currently inaccessible, but there was a secondary mechanical override, a thin cable tension point hidden beneath the Lamborghini badge on the front hood. He found it by feel, inserted a narrow flathead driver, rotated it exactly 90 degrees, and the hood popped open with a soft click. Kyle made a sound. Not a word, just a sound. Dominic propped the hood and located the fuse and relay box, lifted the cover, and ran his finger along the relay positions until he stopped at number 7. Relay 7 controlled power to the lock module's primary circuit. A clean pull would interrupt power for 3 to 6 seconds long enough to create what he needed. He went back to his device, typed the restoration command, and held his finger on the enter key. He looked up at Marcus. When I nod, count to 2 out loud. Loudly. Marcus swallowed. Okay, not before I nod. Understood. Dominic looked through the windshield. Sebastian was watching him. For the first time all morning, Sebastian Crow was sitting perfectly still and paying complete attention to another person. Dominic held up one finger weight, and Sebastian held very still. Dominic pulled relay 7. Every light in the Lamborghini pulsed once a single full-body electrical shiver. Marcus counted. 1, 2. Dominic pressed enter and reseated the relay in one motion. The small screen returned a string of characters, then a single word, restored. The Lamborghini was quiet for 3 full seconds. Then, from somewhere deep in the car's electronic architecture, a soft double chime sounded the system's tone for a completed and successful initialization. The HMI screen blinked on, displayed the startup logo, and settled into its normal state. The ambient lighting in the door panels glowed back to life, and the door locks disengaged with a sound like a held breath releasing. Sebastian pushed the door open and stepped out into the garage air. He stood for a moment without moving, his shirt damp at the collar, his hair slightly disturbed, his jacket still folded on the passenger seat. He looked at nothing in particular. He breathed. No one spoke. Luna climbed down from her stool, crossed the garage, and stood at her father's side. She reached up and found his hand. He held it. Marcus exhaled through his nose and turned to pour himself a cup of coffee that he would not actually drink. Kyle looked at Dominic, then at the car, then at the small black device being unplugged from behind the rear fascia. He opened his mouth, closed it. Sebastian turned. He looked at Dominic the way he had not looked at him all morning, without measuring, without categorizing, without any of the scaffolding of assumption that had been in place since the moment he stepped out of the car and decided who this man was. He said, "How did you know where that port was?" Dominic crouched and replaced the rear fascia panel, pressing it back into the clips until it seated cleanly. He stood and low hands. "It's in the footnote on page 417 of the LDCS integration spec," he said. Most people skip footnotes. The Audi Quiet arrived at 11:15, parking along the side lot with the quiet efficiency of someone who parked in a lot and not on a feeling. Eleanor Voss came through the side door of the garage and stopped. She was in her mid-30s, wearing a navy blazer over dark trousers, her hair pulled up and slightly imperfect in a way that suggested she had been working since early. She carried a flat leather portfolio and a phone that had been ringing, and she had the expression of someone who had stepped into a room expecting one situation and found another entirely. She looked at Sebastian damp-collared, standing beside an open Lamborghini in the middle of a garage, and said, "What happened to the conference call?" "I'll explain later," Sebastian said. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine." The car had a situation. Eleanor looked at the car. Then she looked at the man standing beside it with a tool case at his feet and a 7-year-old daughter leaning against his left knee. She stopped. She looked at him for a long moment, the way you look at someone when the face is completely right but the context is completely wrong. Then, "Dominic Hale." He turned. The recognition was mutual, and quieter than hers, the look of someone who had already had a full morning. "Eleanor, you're working here?" 3 years. She looked at the garage again, really looked at it. Not the way Sebastian had looked at it, but the way someone looks at a place when they are trying to understand a story that started somewhere else. Her eyes moved to Luna, who was watching her with wide, direct attention. Then back to Dominic. Sebastian had been watching this exchange with growing confusion. "You two know each other?" "We work together," Eleanor said. "At Vega Systems." She paused. "Dominic was our lead systems engineer." Sebastian looked at Dominic. "Systems engineer." "Embedded systems," Eleanor said. "He led the team that developed the security and immobilizer protocol for Vega's automotive licensing division." She stopped. She appeared to be calculating something. "The automotive licensing division that sold that protocol to Lamborghini for their Generation 4 platform." The garage was very quiet. Kyle set down his laptop. Sebastian turned to look at the Lamborghini, then back at Dominic. "You're telling me he wrote the system that locked me in?" "He built it," Eleanor said. "Or a version of it." She looked at Dominic as she said it, and there was something in her voice that was not simply informational, something that acknowledged a distance traveled and found unexpectedly short. Dominic had turned back to the workbench and was replacing his tools in the case, not hurrying, not performing calm, just doing the next thing that needed doing. "That true?" Sebastian asked. Dominic closed the case latch. The Generation 4 LDCS core was designed at Vega. The immobilizer logic was my section. He picked up his coffee, found it cold, and set it back down. The car did exactly what it was supposed to do. It found 2 simultaneous anomalies and locked. That's what I built it to do. Then you knew. From the beginning. When I described the warning. I had a strong idea, yes. And you didn't say anything. Dominic looked at him. "You told me you didn't need me. You had someone with real training coming." He said it without sharpness, stating a sequence of events. Nothing more. So I waited. The silence that followed was not comfortable, but it was the honest kind, the kind that means something is being understood rather than simply endured. Sebastian looked at the floor of the garage. Something moved across his face that his face was not accustomed to carrying. He looked like a man doing arithmetic that wasn't coming out the way he expected. He looked up. "I was rude to you." Dominic didn't say it was all right. He didn't say anything for a moment. He just nodded. Once. And the nod contained neither forgiveness performed nor resentment nursed. It was simply acknowledgement. Yes, you were, and here we are. I'd like to pay you correctly for this, Sebastian said. Marcus will put together an invoice. Our standard rate. Sebastian's brow moved. That's all? That's the price of the service. Dominic. I don't charge more because someone needs me, Dominic said. That's not how this garage works. Sebastian looked at him for a long moment. Then he picked up his jacket from the passenger seat, shook it once, and put it back on. The suit was wrinkled and slightly damp, and he wore it as though it were not. Kyle came forward. He held out a hand to Dominic. His face had the open, slightly stunned quality of someone for whom the morning had been an education of an unexpected kind. I'm sorry, he said. I should have listened when you flagged the version mismatch. Dominic shook his hand. The version issue isn't well documented. Most technicians wouldn't catch it. You caught it. I wrote the version requirement, Dominic said simply. Kyle nodded. He began putting his equipment away with the careful, methodical movements of a man who needed something to do with his hands. Eleanor had moved to the workbench and was looking at the framed photograph. The woman with dark hair and the easy smile, standing in front of a lake. She didn't say anything about it. She turned back and found Dominic nearby. And for a moment neither of them spoke, and neither of them moved away. Vega promoted 2 people to director level after you left, she said. Neither of them lasted a year in the role. That's not surprising. No, she agreed. It wasn't. Luna appeared between them from nowhere, the way children do, holding Bud by one arm and looking up at Eleanor with the frank appraisal of someone with no interest in pretending. Are you a friend of my dad's? She asked. Eleanor looked at her, and something softened across her face that had been very composed all morning. We used to work together, a long time ago. Luna considered this. What do you do? I design buildings. Luna looked at the garage ceiling, as though revising her idea of what buildings could be. Have you designed any with secret doors? Not yet, Eleanor said, but I've been thinking about it. Luna nodded approvingly and went back to her stool. The garage grew quieter in the way that follows a storm, not empty, but aired out, cleared of something that had been taking up room. The air itself felt different, lighter by some measure that had nothing to do with weather. Marcus moved to the far bay and began tidying with the steady industry of a man who finds comfort in order. Kyle carried his case to his car and drove away, and if he drove more slowly than he'd arrived, no one noted it. Sebastian stood near his Lamborghini for a while, then sat in it door open this time, one foot on the concrete, and made several phone calls in a voice that was noticeably lower than the one he'd walked in with. Before he left, he came and stood in front of Dominic, who was back under the Cayenne, finishing what he had started hours ago. The project I'm working on, Sebastian said. North Michigan, 40-story mixed use. We've had issues with the building management system. The automation layer keeps throwing false faults on the elevators. Dominic's wrench paused. I don't know if that's your kind of thing anymore, Sebastian said. It's not, Dominic said. A pause. All right, but it's a known firmware conflict between BMS platforms from 2 different generations. Tell your integrator to look at the handshake timeout on the elevator controller. It's probably set to the default value, which is wrong for your building height. Sebastian was quiet for a moment. Thank you. It's a cheap fix, Dominic said. If it's what I think it is. Sebastian walked to his car, looked at it once differently than he had when he arrived. The way you look at something once it has shown you something about yourself, and drove away. The exhaust note of the V10 engine faded down the block and was gone. Eleanor was still there. She stood near the workbench with her portfolio under her arm, her phone quiet for the first time all morning, and she looked at Dominic the way you look at a place you left a long time ago, and returned to find different but still familiar. They sat at the small table near the side door, 2 cups of coffee between them. Marcus had finally made a fresh pot, and the garage settling around them into the sounds of mid-morning. Traffic outside, the tick of a cooling engine, the faint sound of Luna turning pages. You could have gone back, Eleanor said. She didn't mean to the Vega job specifically. He understood what she meant. I thought about it, he said. For about the first 6 months. What changed? He glanced toward Luna, who was deep in her book, the rabbit propped up beside her as though following along. She needed something constant. I could be that. He turned his cup in his hands. Turned out I needed it too. Eleanor was quiet for a moment. Outside, a delivery truck rolled past the open bay door and was gone. I heard about Sarah, she said. I'm sorry. Dominic looked at the table surface. She would have liked the garage. She always said I was better with my hands than with the politics. She wasn't wrong. No. A small sound. Not quite a laugh. She rarely was. Luna looked up from her book and studied Eleanor with the focused interest of someone gathering data. Your rabbit has a red ear, Eleanor said to her. Dad sewed it, Luna said. It fell off. He always was good at fixing things. Luna looked at her father, then back at Eleanor. He fixed the car today, with the mean man inside. He was watching, Dominic said. He was scared, Luna said. Not as a judgment, just as a report. He kept looking at you. Dominic stood and began clearing the cups. Eleanor rose too, tucking her portfolio under her arm, and for a moment they were standing closer together than the logistics of the table required, and neither of them moved back. She pulled a business card from the front pocket of the portfolio, then reconsidered, found the service intake form on the corner of the workbench where Marcus had left it, and wrote a number along the bottom margin in clean, unhurried print. In case you have questions about the North Michigan project, she said, or anything else. She said it without particular emphasis. The words had the shape of a professional offer and the weight of something else, and both of them understood both things, and neither of them said so. Safe drive? Dominic said. I always am, Eleanor said. More than I used to be. She nodded to Marcus, looked at Luna. It was nice to meet you and Bud, and went out the side door. A moment later, the Audi reversed onto the street with a measured signal and was gone. Dominic stood at the workbench looking at the form with the number on it. He did not pick it up immediately. He looked at it the way you look at something that has appeared where nothing was a moment ago, and you are still in the act of deciding what it means. Luna appeared at his elbow with Bud. She's pretty, she said. Dominic picked up the form, folded it once along a clean line, and placed it in the breast pocket of his shirt. Go get your bag, he said. I'll take you to school before lunch. You didn't answer, Luna said. I know. He picked up his wrench from the bench. Go get your bag, Luna. She went, but slowly, and with the particular smile of a child who has decided to store a thing for later and revisit it at her own choosing. Bud hung from her arm, the red-stitched ear pointing up. Dominic went back to the Porsche Cayenne, which was still waiting exactly where he'd left it, unfinished, patient, no opinion about the morning at all, indifferent in the generous way that good work is always indifferent to interruption. The lift held it steady. The socket wrench found its place. And out past the roll-up door, the Chicago midday had settled into something easier, the light pressing in at a low angle from the south, and the block quiet the way it got when the traffic found other streets to use. He lay back down on his board, found his position, and went back to work. The wrench turned. Quarter turn, quarter turn. Some things, done well and done honestly, needed nothing added to them.